This week on the Communicators, more of our interviews from the recently held Digital Media Conference in Northern Virginia. We begin this week with the discussion of how one website is taking a different approach to delivering news. Neil Buddy is president of Daily Me. Mr. Buddy, why another online news site?
Well, Daily Me is really about developing media and technology together in tandem. And dailyme.com is one way in which we showcase that technology. But we're also really about taking our technology that allows for understanding users and their interests and personalizing content and improving targeting of advertising, and taking that out and licensing it to a large number of news sites. We believe that most news sites will need to be personalized in the future to meet the needs of readers, and that they need this kind of technology to improve the quality of what they do, strengthen their engagement with their readers online, and develop really strong online digital businesses.
So when you go to dailyme.com, how can you personalize what you want to receive and where do you receive it from?
Sure. Well, to some extent, dailyme.com is in transition right now. We're about to launch a new version. If you went today, and the ways in which you would personalize are classic forms of personalization. You go into a process where you pick the categories, the topics, the people, you can use keywords, you can use different sources, and that develops a profile of what you say you're interested in. You can receive that in a variety of ways. We will email it to you. We can send you in the email a PDF attachment, which means it's formatted more like a newsletter, and you can print that out. We even have automated printing software that you can set up so that every morning when you get up, there's a personalized newsletter sitting there waiting for you. One of the things that does is give people great control and power of what they're getting. The problem is that it also takes a fair amount of investment in what does it take to personalize the content. So the transition we are making is moving the site in a direction where more and more of the personalization can be done without the user having to take a lot of action. We are tracking everything a user reads on our site, and we understand at very fine-grained levels what the content, the stories that they're reading are about, what people are mentioned, what companies, what organizations, what business topics, if they're about medical conditions, if they're about different kinds of industry terms. We have a deep knowledge of the stories that each user reads. And we create for each user then what we call a newstagram, and that's a picture basically of what they're interested in. We're calling it their digital news affinity or DNA. And with that picture, we can then personalize dailyme.com to reflect the topics, the categories, the subject matter that they're most interested in. We're not trying to get rid of editors. We're actually doing this in a way that blends editorial views of the news with things that are of interest to you. I think one of the problems online is you're trying to drive your news through a smaller and smaller window. Now it's down to the size of an iPhone. And when you get to a small window like that to try and find the news of interest to you, it has to be closer and closer to your interests. You still want to know the big stories when there's a train crash in the metro system locally or when there's a major disaster in the world. You still want that kind of news, but also you want things of interest to you. One person may be very sports-oriented, another business-oriented, somebody else entertainment. And to take a lot of that space and that limited real estate and put stuff that I'm not interested in is very much a waste.
So how different from, let's say, Yahoo or the Drudge Report or other Daily Beast?
I mean, most of those are one view for everybody. It's, here's what the editors who are controlling that page provide to you. So the editors of the Daily Beast or Huffington Post or the New York Times are making decisions about what is on the front page. And they're controlling that. And when I come to that site, if I agree with or I'm interested in the things they think the world is interested in, it's great. But if I go to a site and the topics, the stories that they've chosen to feature at the front are not of interest to me, and the things that I'm more interested in are buried deep inside the site, I'm never going to find them, perhaps. So our technology is really about bringing out from the wealth of information that's out there in news sites, the pieces of information that might be of more interest to any given user, and bringing that to a point where it's more visible to that user than if it's buried deep in the site.
What is your background in news?
Sure. I hate to say I've been doing this for 30 years in some form. I actually started working for a newspaper when I was 16 years old, a good old weekly that still had linotypes and hot metal. And Most people may not even know what I'm talking about. But I started just after my 16th birthday. The editor, I went to work and said, "Can you drive?" And I said, "Sure." And he threw me the keys to his car and said, "Go out and pick up the results of the golf tournament and write it up." He forgot to ask me if I had a license. So yes, I could drive, but I didn't have a license. So I still drove his car out and got the results. I worked for newspapers then after college. I really got into digital about, I guess it'd be now 15, 17 years ago, when I went to work for Dow Jones in what was their electronic publishing area. And out of that, about 6 years into that, we started formulating some ideas of what could the Wall Street Journal look like in an online environment. I built some early prototypes. People got excited. They said, "Okay, go off and build that." And so beginning in, I guess that was 1993, end of 93, I was part of a team that built the Wall Street Journal online. And we built that, I ran that up until the end of 2002. After that I spent about 3 years running Yahoo News. And then I met Eduardo Hauser, who started Daily Me a couple years ago at a conference, and we started talking, and he persuaded me to come join dailyme.com and see if we could build this into a great media and technology business.
Who's Eduardo Hauser?
Eduardo is a Venezuelan American who most recently ran AOL Latin America. Before that, worked from a number of other media businesses. He's actually a lawyer by background, but he tries to hide that fact. Very passionate news junkie who really felt like there was a need online to find a way to sort out from the mix of all the great news that's out there the things that would be of interest to a user, and that's why he started Daily Me.
Wall Street Journal is still one of the few pay news sites. Is Daily Me going to be a pay news site?
I think what allowed the Wall Street Journal to charge is a number of things. One is it's a news category business, primarily, in investing information that lends itself much more to a subscription. People who need it for their business, they need it for making investment decisions. But more than that, when we were building the Wall Street Journal online, we started with the assumption that we wanted to charge for it. I think a lot of people believe we built it and then said, "Oh, let's charge for it." No, we started up front saying we think we want to build a subscription service. And then everything we did along the way was supportive of that. We said, what was it going to take to create a product, a collection of information online that people will pay for? And so we built into it lots of capabilities. We included everything from the Wall Street Journal, most of the real-time Dow Jones news wires, a significant amount of archival content, all of which were in other environments being charged for. You know, the value, if you added all those things up, that we put into the Wall Street Journal was probably $400 or $500 a year of value. And our initial price was $49 a year. So we recognized it was going to be difficult to get people to pay, that we had to create something of substantial value with a lot of information, a lot of content, a lot of features and functionality to get them started into that path. I think they're now up to charging $100, but it's still a very valuable product that has a lot of utility to people.
Well, Robert Thompson, the current editor of the Wall Street Journal, has described the Googles and the Yahoos and people who take others' content as tapeworms. Associated Press has had some complaints about that also. Is Daily Me an aggregator like that?
Daily Me takes a different approach to aggregation. One of the things that we did from the beginning was license a lot of content. So we are paying licensing fees to AP and Reuters. We're also licensing from another source about 500 newspapers' content. We did that for a couple reasons. One is that we think we can create a better news experience online if it's all there and you're not jumping off. You know, most of these aggregators, you go to one page and then you jump off to something that looks totally different. And it's a very disjointed experience. We wanted Daily Me to be very consistent, very easy to use, so that by licensing the content, incorporating it into the site, it's a much better experience. It also allows us to do things like the print newsletter I talked about earlier, that we can give output formats that others can't because they don't have the rights to the content beyond a headline or maybe a snippet of the text. We have the full text and we can create other formats. We have a couple of products that we offer through the Kindle that are kind of popular. One is all about the book industry, the publishing industry. It's reviews, news about, we call it Daily Me Literati. And it's very popular on the Kindle because we tailored it, and it's a mix of news stories from a variety of different sources. rather than from a single source. And if you're really interested in books, it's a great way to keep up with the industry.
Well, Mr. Buddy Howard, how is Daily Me going to support itself?
Sure. Well, DailyMe.com is still going to be advertising supported. But the bulk of our business really is about taking our technology, making it available to other news sites, other publications on the internet. Our model there is that some of our services will be available for free. They can incorporate them into their site and get a certain amount of information and a certain amount of functionality. To be able to use our technology to start to personalize their site, there would start to be fees associated with that. But we think the fees are very much in line with the kind of value they'll recognize in terms of deeper user engagement, users spending more time, users viewing more pages, users coming back. A personalized news site is much more of a place that people want to make their home for news. So if one of these news sites adds some of our capabilities to it, we think they'll see a return for the modest amount of money that they'll have to pay us for the technology that's behind it.
Currently, when you go to dailyme.com, it's Daily Me Beta. When will the new site be online?
The redesign that we're working on now that will incorporate much more of the personalization capabilities is targeted for sometime around the middle of July. We're not really
2009.
Yes, we're only, it's very close to being ready, but we've got to iron out a number of bugs, and we should have it out somewhere in the next couple of weeks.
Neil Buddy, dailyme.com. Thank you. Many of the panels at this tech conference dealt with current technology in the marketplace, but we also had the chance to talk about some future technologies and their funding sources. Here at the Northern Virginia Digital Media Conference is Janet Yang, who is a principal partner with Novak Biddle. Ms. Yang, what is Novak Biddle?
Well, we're a venture capital firm, and we're based outside of Bethesda, Maryland. And we're about 12 years old. And we have about $600 million under management, and our focus is purely IT, meaning that we don't do biotech or healthcare. So we have 7 partners on the investment side, and all we do is do IT investments. And by IT, it incorporates anything from digital media, for example, which is why we're here, all the way to mobile and telecommunications and semiconductors, materials, software, and the whole gamut.
Is it fair to say that most IT venture capitalists are based out in Silicon Valley or out in California? Is it rare to find one here in the Washington area?
Well, obviously the mecca is Silicon Valley, but we are seeing pockets of growth elsewhere in the country. Boston is a fairly big market, and this region is actually quite in terms of the talent and the ideas are quite prolific. Primarily because we have a lot of government labs, so there are a lot of talents in the research and labs here. Plus, there are a lot of great universities here, like the University of Maryland School of Engineering and Virginia Tech. So we do get to see quite a lot of young entrepreneurs.
So what do you look for when you may be recommending an investment in IT?
Well, right now, particularly, obviously at all time, we're looking for great ideas, fantastic risk takers in a large and high growth and emerging markets. Those are a given. But particularly in this time, we look for entrepreneurs who really truly understand how to efficiently use capital, how to maximize capital in the most efficient way, whether it be in business models or the way they go marketing, either through partnerships of channeling because they have contacts, or the technology is just very good at scaling on without too much effort into marketing and sales and marketing. That's probably the sort of the differentiation.
There are 2 products I want to ask you about if you had invested or wish you had or think they would have been a good investment. The flip camera and Twitter.
Well, the jury is still out on Twitter in terms of a business model. I know they are incredibly popular from a user perspective, but we still haven't figured out how they're making money. But I said if I had to pick one, I would probably pick the flip camera.
Do people come to you and say, here I have this product and I need your money?
We actually do both in terms of sourcing deals where we proactively go to universities and research labs. Approximately 40% of our portfolio companies are spin-outs of research labs, either from universities or government research labs, because they're the Army Research Lab, the Naval Research Lab. So there are a lot of technologies where we will actively, proactively seek. And there is a big part where, because we've built a reputation, particularly in the Mid-Atlantic and East Coast area, that people will come to us to seek financing. Our typical investment stages, we do all stages of investment from very, very early stage, which is where there are just two guys in a garage with a PowerPoint, or two gals in a garage with a PowerPoint and a great idea, all the way to growth capital. So meaning our typical check size is as small as $500,000 all the way to about $10 to $15 million for growth and expansion.
Internationally, is that where the growth in IT is right now? Or do you focus here on the States?
Our fund's mandate is primarily in the United States and particularly on the East Coast. However, we have an investment in Israel, we have an investment in India. So opportunistically, when there are great opportunities, particularly where technologies that is transferable, that can be applicable to outside of this country, and particularly in the mobile arena. In fact, for example, where outside of the United States the market is even bigger, that's where we perhaps spend a lot more time outside of the border.
You've spent a lot of your career in investment in IT, working on investment in IT, and in fact lived in China for several years working on investment, is that correct? And how does the Chinese market compare to the U.S. market?
Oh, wow. That is a conversation that probably could take hours. Yes, I have spent quite a bit of time both here in the United States doing investments as well as overseas. In fact, I was the CFO of Global Internet Services for PCCW, which was one of the largest telecommunications company in Asia, and where I did a lot of joint ventures for them in China. You know, I think the entrepreneurial spirit in China is starting to evolve. You know, one would say probably 1 to 2 decades ago, it's primarily still in the manufacturing, the low tech, perhaps more hardware than software. But I see that trend starting to shift, where quite a bit more are now into software, more of the high tech investments. There is always a little bit of a competition between India and China in that regards, where India is known for the software technologies and China more the hardware, but I think that is starting to shift in China, in my opinion, particularly in the last 5 years, where one of the driving forces is also because a lot of U.S. venture capitalists are moving to China and to Asia to invest. So we're seeing the likes of U.S. venture capitalists investing in, you know, obviously in Baidu, which is the Google of China. You know, there's also the MySpace of China, the Facebooks of China. So there are a lot of sort of similarities in what is hot here, what is hot in China will be a follow suit in a similar type of technology.
And finally, Janet Yang, could you speak a little bit about the mobile investments that you're looking at now down the future?
Well, mobile, one of the most exciting area in mobile, in my opinion, is actually in the apps, in the applications. And, you know, here we actually have a company in our portfolio company called SGN, stands for Social Gaming Network, which is one of the top iPhone apps, a developing company, and they're based out in Silicon Valley. It's actually a spin out of a local tech company and moved to the West Coast. What is really interesting is we're starting to see mobile advertising, mobile marketing, and consumer have their spending habits of their time and money is really shifting into data. And the massive proliferation and growth in apps really shows and proves to us that the consumer is really hungry for more and more data consumption, just wrapped up in a new package called apps. So I think that is an incredibly exciting area that we are very, very excited about.
Is it all about the iPhone?
No, actually, I don't think so. iPhone is obviously where there are a lot of buzz is going, but we think, That is still a relatively small market. Certainly a fast-growing market. But I think the jury's still out as to who's going to, sort of take over that.
Janet Yang is a principal with Novak Biddle Venture Partners. Political campaigns have gone high-tech, and at the Digital Media Conference, there was someone there who was responsible for the Obama campaign's text messaging platform. Kevin Bertram is the founder of Distributive Networks. Mr. Bertram, what does Distributive Networks do?
We're a mobile marketing and technology company. What we do is we help brands and political clients and governmental organizations manage text messaging and communication with users via cell phone.
So as a user of a cell phone, how would I ever see your product?
Probably the best known example is the text messaging done during the presidential campaign. Barack Obama used it to keep in touch with millions of people by text message to let them know if he was going to be in town, let them know definitely to get out the vote, encourage them to volunteer, and all kinds of communication like that. You might have remembered when they were waiting for the vice presidential announcement, everybody had their cell phones out waiting. Even on television, everyone was waiting because we sent the announcement via text message about Joe Biden being the vice president.
So you knew 10 minutes before everybody else?
Maybe even 15, but I couldn't tell anybody, so.
And how do you get the names? How do you aggregate all those names?
Sure, well, the nice thing about text messaging is that it has to be opt-in. Unlike email, where people are selling lists, or direct mail, where people are selling lists, that's prohibited in text messaging, which is great. So you're not receiving all these messages that you don't want, and because it's tightly policed by the cell phone carriers, it's been actually very effective. So what you need to do is you need to engage people. If you're a presidential candidate, you say, please text me, and then we start a dialogue. Or if you're a marketer, a brand, you'd say, enter our sweepstakes to win, and then ask follow-up if you want to continue to receive messages. It's all that permission-based marketing that makes it so much more effective than email or, frankly, any other communication.
Is the technology that you use advanced, or is it low-tech?
I would say it's dirt simple, actually. We receive messages and we send messages. Now, there is a little bit of special sauce in there about making sure things are handled properly and developing a customer relationship, basically. It's actually pretty simple technology, I would say.
And when it comes to using this as a marketing tool, how does it compare to buying an ad on network TV, say?
Well, I think the best way to think of it is not to think of it as standing out on an island on its own, but as being part of an integrated media campaigns. So if you're buying an ad, you might also include a call to action to text in via SMS, or you might put that on a radio ad, you might put that in your print materials. If you're let's say you're a sports company, you're the Washington Capitals, and people are at your game and they're texting in there, it's something that's it's a supportive call to action that helps all of these other media. And so it's not a comparison of which is more effective. It's can they work together to achieve better results.
How much of a growth industry is this?
Well, despite the economy, we've been growing quite steadily, so I'm pretty sure that's indicative of that it's definitely a growth industry. And makes me all embarrassed.
The mobile market is a growth industry, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
How so?
Well, because there's more people using their cell phones, there's more people with cell phones, there's people developing more and interesting ways for people to use them. I think one of the exciting things to see is that people properly conceive text messaging just to be 14-year-old girls text messaging their friends, and that's just not true. You're seeing a wider and wider segment of people using their phones to communicate. One of the biggest drivers, oddly enough, is people with kids, especially people with kids in college. They won't answer an email, they won't answer a phone call, but they will send a text message back. And so now you have people in their 50s sending text messages to their kids, and then they realize how useful it is, and then they might send a text message to their spouse, and then they might vote for their player of the game at a soccer match, or get stock quotes to their phone, and they just realize that there's some value to it, and then they start to use it. Not to say that people in their 50s are using text messaging as aggressively as, say, that 14-year-old girl, but there's definitely, it's widening out, and more people are using text messaging.
So you talk about permission. What about the privacy concerns with this technology and with this distribution system?
Well, that's, like I said, the fantastic thing about this is that if you text into a program, then obviously your phone number is on that, and then the organization has to say, do you want to continue receiving messages from us? It's a completely permission-based. If at any time you want to stop, you can reply stop to the message, and they have to cease all communication with you. You don't have access to any of the billing data or your home address or any of the information that your cell phone carrier has. That's not shared with marketers, which I think is a good thing. You definitely don't want that to happen. So it's only the information that you want to share is shared with an organization. And so I see almost no privacy concerns.
Is this a regulated industry at all?
It is. Obviously, any new industry, regulators struggle to keep up. Obviously, the FCC oversees the cell phone carriers, who then oversee kind of the smaller groups as parts of the value chain, the marketers, the technology companies like ourselves. And then there's a strong trade association, the Mobile Marketing Association, that it's not a governmental regulation, but self-regulation by the industry. And between the FCC looking over the carriers and then the self-regulation, between those two, it is regulated.
Mr. Bertram, how would you compare your industry to, say, Twitter?
Well, so it's interesting. Twitter is great, but Twitter has nothing to do with mobile. Like, if you ask anybody how many people actually get Twitter messages sent to their phone, and it's almost none. Because Twitter is a high volume and you get overloaded. What Twitter is, it's a great blogging tool, and it's really good for that, but it doesn't allow the kind of back and forth communication that text messaging allows. It's one-to-many. It's a broadcast to everybody on your Twitter, whereas with text messaging, you can be a little more selective. Let's say you only want to send messages to people who live in Virginia, who've said, I live in Virginia and I like ice cream, or whatever criteria that you've developed. So I see text messaging as a far more of a scalpel, whereas Twitter is just a loud broadcast, which is very effective and very fun, but not mobile. And people aren't getting Twitter when they're out at an event. It's harder to interact. You have to have your laptop with you, which, if you're at a sporting event, you probably don't have your laptop there.
Can you send video, or is that a growth industry part of your industry?
You can send video. The handsets in the United States are a little bit behind where they are in other parts of the world. So, it depends on your phone, and it depends, the networks get clogged, and it's one of those things it's next year, and it's next year, and it's been next year for a couple of years. We'll see when it really takes off.
Are other political campaigns besides the Obama campaign picking up on this?
So, obviously I can't disclose our client list, but I know both governors' races in New Jersey and Virginia in 2009, both sides have mobile in their campaigns. The New York mayoral race in 2009 is using mobile, and then the 2010 races, everybody who wants to win is using mobile.
Distributive Networks, Kevin Bertram, founder. Most are familiar with Fox Broadcasting's TV business, but we had the chance to hear from the person responsible for bringing its programming to the web. Bill Bradford is a senior vice president of Fox Broadcasting, and one of his areas of responsibility include digital media properties. Mr. Bradford, what does that mean?
Well, it means being responsible for all the digital components of the Fox Broadcasting Company, the television network. So it means Fox.com, our streaming service, our show sites like AmericanIdol.com, 24, Hell's Kitchen, So You Think You Can Dance. So anything having to do with digital, including the outbound marketing, using external sites to bring viewers back to our shows.
And besides the television network, how do you get eyeballs on your screens?
Well, a lot of different ways. We like to fish where the fish are, and the consumers are in a very fragmented way all across the internet, for example. So we reach out and touch them using Twitter. We have Facebook and MySpace pages for all of our shows. We post promotional content on YouTube. We syndicate content via Hulu. So if there's a consumer touch point, we're out there.
Are more people yet watching on their computer screens or on their mobile devices than on their TVs?
No, not at all. In fact, about 99% of the viewing of video last year was on the television set.
So why all the attention on these new medias?
I think it's because it's growing, and it is a growing field, but we still see the TV as the primary source where people are going to get our entertainment content, but it is growing, so that 1% is a significant 1%, and we do see growth in the digital space, but we see it as complementary, or something that actually is additive to our viewership and not something that's cannibalistic.
Do you see growth still in the television market?
Yeah, absolutely. We see it, at the end of the day, TV is all about great storytelling. And consumers are still going to want great storytelling. It's going to become more and more fragmented as far as where they get those stories, but we see that the television industry is strong, and we're out there touching consumers every single day, and it's a great place to be, especially as digital continues to grow. We see it as a growing business.
How do you protect your product?
Are you talking about through digital rights management, things like that? Yeah, we make sure that our product is well secured for our studios so that it doesn't get pirated. And in fact, when it does in fact happen, we try to thwap it down as fast as we can, because that intellectual property is very important to the network and to the studios.
Is that a major concern or a major problem right now for Fox?
I think it's more of by being proactive and providing the content in a very licensed way, things like creating Hulu, creating our own streaming service. The piracy in the United States does not really seem to be a big issue for us. Overseas, we see a lot of our consumption happens overseas because that product is not necessarily available in some markets, but in the United States, it really hasn't been a big issue for us.
Is advertising still an effective way for people to get free TV? So-called free TV.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and we have deep partnerships with a lot of advertisers and very, very, very good relationships with them, and we actually see digital as a way to complement that relationship, so that it's not just within that time slot in the week where the advertiser gets to reach out and touch the consumer associated with that brand, but 24/7, and that's why we've created a lot of very dimensional products for our advertising community that is additive to the consumer experience.
When you hear about everywhere TV that the cable companies are doing, what's your reaction?
I think it's a very interesting concept. There's a lot of moving parts that are, there's news about it every single day, but it's the ultimate principle of making sure that the distributors and also the studios and the networks get properly compensated for the content that they're taking the time and the investment to produce. I think it's a good thing.
Bill Bradford, Senior Vice President of Fox.
And finally this week, for all the Facebook users out there, an interview with the person involved in making sure that you get to know more about the friends you have on the site.
Tim O'Shaughnessy is the co-founder and CEO of Living Social. Mr. O'Shaughnessy, what is Living Social?
So Living Social, Peter, is the place that people go on presumably Facebook for the most part, to go and share and communicate around the things that they're interested in and passionate about.
And what's your role in a Facebook or a MySpace or a Bebo?
So in that world, if you ever see people kind of recommending books to their friends, or kind of building up their collections and writing reviews, we're predominantly in books and movies and beers and all sorts of things. We're the place that people go and do that.
And how is it that you've developed those platforms?
Well, really, it all started when Facebook, about 2 years ago or so, launched their API, which said, hey, third parties, you can come and go and build within us. So once that happened, we really said, oh, this is a unique opportunity where we can really add value to these places that lots of people are using already.
And how do you build the, when you say you've added value, but how do you figure out the algorithms to get into those places?
Well, it's really probably a little simpler than it seems. So, you really look at what the user experience in a Facebook is, for example, and they give you a couple of different areas where users congregate, where if you can kind of, we as a company can plug into. So, for example, there's the stream or the feed in Facebook, which is where when somebody logs in is their first page. And they let us go and say, hey, somebody wrote a review in your product. Do you want to go and publish it to the stream where all their friends can see it?
Where's the growth in this industry right now?
Well, I think Facebook is really killing it. I mean, there's been a lot of news around MySpace, and they've had a little bit of turmoil, and so I think that they've done a great job of growing, and I think they'll continue to grow. I think the other real area of growth is from a mobile social standpoint. So you have the iPhone platforms that are out and really doing well, and I think that as Apple continues to make new features, it'll become a more social experience.
Is Twitter included in this group?
So Twitter is an interesting play, I think. They've achieved great press and great growth, and you've obviously seen the value from a breaking news standpoint and some coverage standpoint. One of the things that's interesting is there have been some reports published that a lot of users that start to use Twitter actually don't go back. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how that, can they build a sustainable user base off of this press and momentum they see.
So Tim O'Shaughnessy, when you approach Facebook, what do you say to them that Living Social can do?
We tell Facebook that we provide value to your overall site and experience. People will come to Facebook just to use Living Social. So if we can bring more people back into the Facebook space, that's great for them.
One of the legislative issues that is being talked about in this next coming session of Congress and the new FCC is privacy. Is that an issue that concerns you, and how do you deal with it?
Oh, I think it's one of the things we think about every day. One of the reasons Facebook, I think, has gotten to where they are is that they gave really granular privacy controls to their users. And, we've tried to follow that model. I think that there's, to some degree, a generational gap that occurs in the privacy space still. But I could really see in the next, 18, 24 months that being an issue that becomes, more and more prevalent.
What do you mean by granular?
Well, if you can go and say, all right, I want some people to go and see the movies I've watched or the books that I've read, but I don't want everyone to be able to see it. So you can really, make that decision on who, you can control who views your profile and content, that sort of thing.
Tim O'Shaughnessy, co-founder and CEO of Living Social.
Thanks so much, Pete.
Don't forget that this program, all the interviews that we did at the Digital Media Conference, and other Communicators programs can be found on our website at cspan.org. Go to cspan.org and click on Communicators, and you'll also be able to find out how you can get a podcast of this program.